Well, hello fellow crafters, Janine here, and today I'm finally bringing you the video showing you how I watercolored the beautiful stamped images from my Stampin' Up! Rubber stamps and in watercolor. I wanted to do two different methods to see how I liked them, to see how they turned out. On this particular rose image, I wanted to do a more precise, kind of Copic style shading where everything blended really, seamlessly and so forth, to get that more precise watercolor look rather than a loose watercolor look. And on the other image, I wanted to do a loose watercolor look, that more painterly, coloring outside the lines sort of thing that just looks beautiful and ethereal. I love it. Lindsay Wyrick does it all the time. She does it beautifully. And I have it in my mind that I want to be able to do it the way Lindsay does, but I'm just having a hard time letting go and not fighting for control of the paint and the image and so forth. But with this rose image, I just started with the rose color. I'm using the Gansai Tambi Kiritaki 24 pan set of watercolors, and I started with the rose color just to give everything a wash of that color. And you can see in the top of this image, that was that was my first attempt at doing that looser watercolor on that other stamped image, and you'll see that eventually goes away because I was just so unhappy and so dissatisfied with the way it was coming out. I just scrapped it and started over from scratch. But on the lower image, the bottom roses, I just kept building up that same rose color and then a little bit of the darker red shade where there would be natural darkness and shading in the folds of the petals, and where one petal is over another petal and so forth. And so I wasn't trying to hurry it. I was just building up the layers of color slowly and moving around the rose, giving painting on one area, one petal here, and then moving to another petal on the other side of the rose, giving things time to dry in between, so that I wasn't putting wet paint on wet paint, which just starts to get kind of muddy and you start losing the definition that you're going for. And so I just continued to keep moving around from area to area, building up the depth of color. And then where I wanted to keep highlighted color, if I got too much color in those areas, then I would just clean my brush off, and then with clean water I would go over the area and lift color and just kind of blot it away with a dry brush to continue to leave those light highlighted areas as I wanted them to be. And that's just basically what the process is just continuing to go over the same areas that have already been painted and adding depth of color. And then what I would do is rinse my brush off and have a clean brush, and then just go back in with that clean brush and kind of blend the area in between the lighter color and the darker color that I just added. And of course, here you can see really well just the hot mess that that other flower was turning out to be. I kept trying to fool with it and trying to force it, and I finally just gave up and got rid of it and started over again. I learned in the process what I was doing, some of the things that I was doing wrong, and so I decided, let's just start over and see if we can end up with an image that I like. So on this flower, I'm adding water first. On the other rose, I didn't add water first. I just went in with some really wet paint on dry paper. But here I wanted to do that looser painterly look. So to do that, you add water first to the paper and then drop paint in, and it just kind of blooms and flows. And here I was repeating one of my earlier mistakes and just going in with the same tone of color instead of different tones of color. And at first I couldn't understand why I wasn't getting the result I was looking for, and it was because I was just going in with the same tonality of color and not different tones of color. And I'm still just kind of working with that and adding deeper tones of the same color, and it just wasn't working. So I left it alone, decided just, let's leave it be, let it dry for a little bit, and we'll come back to it in a minute. In the meantime, I had let the other rose dry while I was working on the looser one that you see at the top, and just went back in and was continuing to shade. And here I finally figured out what I was doing wrong, that I wasn't adding different colors into the mix to give it more depth and tone and a more painterly look. So after it had dried, I just wet it again, and here you can see I'm dropping in yellows and oranges. That will help give it that more depth and tonality. And here's a little bit of dioxazine purple that I'd mixed with a little bit of the rose color, again to add a different tonality into the mix. And now I'm going to start on the leaves. And I'm doing the leaves the exact same way I did the rose, you know, except just in green. So I'm going in with my lightest shade of green and keeping it really, really, really light where I want highlights on the leaves themselves, and not putting too much color in those areas. Because I do, like I said, I just want to keep them light so that they have that highlight where the sun would be hitting them. And then I'm going in with a little bit darker green where the leaves are more shaded by the petals of the rose, and giving a little bit more depth of color in that area. And when my red wasn't quite dark enough, I added just a touch of green to it to give it more depth, because opposite colors on the color wheel, or contrasting colors on the color wheel, will deepen each other if you add just the slightest amount. So if I added just the slightest amount of green to the red, I got a deeper red. And if I added just the slightest amount of red to the green, I got a deeper green. And that's one of Lindsay's tips that she does quite frequently, is she stays within the same colors, you know, the same 3 or 4 colors, and mixes them together to create depth, tonality, and so forth, or to create different colors altogether. And that's what I did here. I mixed more red and green in more equal proportion to make more of a grayish black or grayish brown, to do the veining and to do the stems on the roses and on the leaves, so that the colors still coordinate and work together, because it's the same colors I was already using, but mixing them in such a way to get more depth in the color, and to achieve a brown, or to achieve a blackish brown. And here I'm going in to do the center of this flower, and I added a little bit of water, and then some burnt sienna in the very center, and then some burnt umber in the very center, and then some burnt sienna around it. And honestly don't remember what I was doing at this point, why I was adding a little more color around the flower. I think I was trying to, I think I was picking up water that was starting to puddle, because I didn't want it to pull that burnt sienna and burnt umber into the rose, and it was starting to do that, so I was using a drier brush to pick those puddles up. And here I'm just starting to put the finishing touches on the rose, just those little last depths of color. And again, sometimes I'm wetting my brush, cleaning it off, and going in with a clean brush to lift color where I wanted to maintain highlight. Of the two roses, the one that was more controlled and more precise did end up being my favorite. But I think it's just because I have so much to learn in both techniques, but specifically in the looser one, because I just keep wanting to mess with it, and I keep wanting to give it definition, and that's not what loose watercoloring is all about. I mean, yes, you do need some depth of color to define one thing from another thing. But that's not where I was going with it. I was going with control, and I just couldn't let go. But on this rose, I wanted to put more of a yellow background in, because I thought it would be a pretty contrast against that bright pink. So I wet the background around the rose and dropped about a medium tone yellow around it. Again, just trying really hard to be loose, but I think that's the problem. I was trying too hard instead of just letting it be. And of course, as in my usual fashion, I couldn't leave it alone. I had to continue to fuss with it. So I continued to fuss with the background. But anyway, on the cluster of roses, I wanted to do a more sky blue background. So I was being very careful in wetting the background. I used a smaller brush so that I could get in between the leaves and the stems and the roses. And so I could be very careful about wetting the paper, because I did not want to lose all that beautiful definition that I had created within the roses and the leaves. But I did leave the background fairly loose, started with more color at the top, and then used less color going towards the bottom, so it would have a little bit of a gradient. in color, and I think I did a better job with just kind of letting it be on this rose than I did on this one. And here I am still just trying to clean up around the edges, and that started kind of getting away from me, so I thought, well, let me just pull this color down and give it a little bit of a shadow, and that looked good right there. But of course I couldn't leave that alone, and I continued to fuss with it and ended up with something that didn't look as good. Had I just left the first part of it alone, it would have been fine, but I continued to mess with it, and then decided I needed to fix that by adding more yellow to the situation. Well, once I added more yellow to the bottom, I felt like I had to add more yellow to the top. And this is how things just get away from me, when I could have just left well enough alone and it would have been beautiful the way it was. So lesson learned, you know, if you're trying to be loose and painterly, be loose and painterly and not so controlled and rigid. Thank you so much for watching me color and play with my new Stampin' Up! Stamps. It was fun, it was challenging, it was experimental, but I think I learned a lot in the process, and I love the way this turned out. The second try on this one was definitely much better and had that looser, you know, more painterly look that I was going for with it. I'm still fighting the urge to want to fuss with it and neaten it up, but I'm fighting that urge to leave it alone and just enjoy the looseness of it. But anyway, give me some of your thoughts, and would you like to see more of these sorts of videos? Did you guys like watching me paint and do shading and such with the watercolors? And I'm sorry, I don't think I ever showed you. Of course, it's the only watercolors I have is the Gansai Tambi Kiritaki 24 pan set is what I have, and that's what I used today. And I mostly used this row of colors here in the oranges and the pinks and the reds. Then I used these two greens. I used what I would describe as a dioxazine purple. I guess I used more of this palette than I realized. I used these yellows and this yellow ochre, the burnt sienna, and the burnt umber. And I did use this blue here. No, I'm sorry. No, it was this blue here that I did the blues in the background there. But those were the colors that I used, and I would really love to hear from you guys about this. If you like watching me paint and color with paints, so to speak. If you'd like to see more of these sorts of videos, give me a thumbs up. Please remember to rate, comment, and subscribe. And as always, you guys have a very blessed day. Bye now.